A bark sliced through the silence of an abandoned park, forever altering the fate of 3 lives. This is the true story of a dog who saw what no one else did, and a man who discovered that family isn't limited to blood ties. Prepare for a heartwarming journey that will touch your soul. If you believe in the power of compassion, like and share this incredible story with someone special. The afternoon hung over the municipal park like a leaden veil. The air carried the heavy scent of impending rain, and the leaves of the sycamore trees whispered ancient secrets to the restless wind. It was in this melancholic setting that John Miller walked every day, following the same gravel path that snaked between empty benches and century-old oaks. Beside him, Thor, a stray with fur as black as a starless night, kept a steady pace, his nose always alert to the smells and sounds only he seemed to perceive. John was 34 and carried on his shoulders the weight of a chosen solitude, not out of bitterness, but from a quietude that had settled in his soul after the untimely deaths of his parents 5 years prior. The house where he lived, an inheritance from a lifetime of honest work, was his refuge from the world, and Thor, rescued from cruel abandonment 3 years ago, was his only true companion. The dog had amber eyes that seemed to see beyond the veil of appearances. On that particular March afternoon, as autumn began to paint the leaves in golden hues, Thor displayed unusual restlessness. His barks, normally reserved for situations of real danger, echoed through the park with an insistence John had never witnessed. The animal pulled at the leash forcefully, always heading towards the same spot, a densely wooded area in the park's north corner, where few people ventured due to the thick undergrowth and uneven terrain. John resisted at first, pulling Thor back to the familiar path, but the dog became increasingly agitated, his whimpers rising in pitch as if trying to communicate something urgent that human words couldn't express. It was on the 5th day of this strange routine that John finally gave in. The sun was already setting, dyeing the sky orange and purple, when he allowed Thor to guide him into the woods. The smell of damp earth and decaying leaves filled his nostrils as dry branches cracked under his feet. Thor moved forward with determination, his body tense like a violin string about to snap. Suddenly, the dog stopped in front of an old fig tree whose twisted roots formed a kind of natural cave. There, among worn blankets and dry leaves, 2 small bodies moved weakly. John's heart pounded like a wild horse. They were babies, apparently twins, no more than a few weeks old. Their faint cries could barely be heard over the rustling of the leaves, and their pale skin contrasted sharply with the dark earth around them. John's first instinct was to run, call the police, hand the problem over to the competent authorities. But something in Thor's gaze, in the way the dog positioned himself protectively beside the children, licking their tiny, cold hands gently, made him hesitate. The little ones were dehydrated, their lips cracked like the earth after a long drought, and one of them could barely keep her eyes open. Without thinking about the consequences, John removed his coat and wrapped the twins with the care of someone, handling antique porcelain. Thor guided the way back, constantly looking behind as if checking if his owner was still carrying the precious burden. The walk to his house, normally 15 minutes, seemed to last an eternity. Every person passing on the street seemed to observe him suspiciously, although most were too absorbed in their own lives to notice the drama unfolding. John's house, a 1950s construction with exposed brick walls and a garden his mother had lovingly cultivated, was transformed that night. What was once a sanctuary of silence and memories became a makeshift operations center. John rushed to the kitchen, boiled water, searched the internet for instructions on caring for newborns. The twins needed milk, diapers, clean clothes, medical attention. His mind, accustomed to the predictable routine of a freelance graphic designer, now navigated the turbulent waters of unexpected responsibilities. Thor remained beside the sofa where the babies were settled, his vigilant eyes never leaving the small forms that breathed with difficulty. It was as if the dog understood that he had only completed the first part of his mission, and that now he needed to ensure the children survived. The first night was a nightmare of endless cries and silent despair. John improvised baby bottles, with small cups and spoons, dripping warm milk into the twins' thirsty mouths. Every drop they swallowed was a small victory against the relentless clock. Around 3 in the morning, when fatigue threatened to overcome him, one of the babies, the smaller one, started coughing violently. Panic seized John, like a cold wave. He couldn't take them to the hospital without explaining how he had found them, without involving the police, without risking them being taken to an overcrowded shelter. In a moment of desperate clarity, he remembered Mary Garcia, the neighbor from the end of the street who was a retired nurse. Without a second thought, he wrapped the twins in blankets and knocked on her door, Thor at his side like a faithful shadow. Mary Garcia, a woman in her 60s with gray hair, always, neatly tied in a bun, opened the door with a face marked by interrupted sleep. But one look at the children in his arms was enough for her professional instincts to take over. Without asking unnecessary questions, she led him inside, examining the babies with experienced hands. The smaller one had the beginnings of pneumonia. She diagnosed and needed antibiotics urgently. Mary had some basic medications at home, leftovers from her professional life, and began treating the child immediately. As she worked, she gave meaningful glances to John, looks that said she knew there was more to this story than he was telling. But for now, the children's lives were the priority. The following hours were a blur of frantic activity. Mary instructed John on how to prepare the milk properly, how to check the temperature, how to hold the babies so they wouldn't choke. Thor remained lying at their feet, his ears attentive to every sound the twins made. When the sun rose, painting the sky in rosy hues that promised hope, the crisis had passed. The two babies slept peacefully, their breaths synchronized as if they shared the same dream. Mary made strong coffee while John finally allowed himself to sit, the weight of the night collapsing on his shoulders like an avalanche. It was then that she spoke, her voice soft but firm, that he needed to regularize the situation. The children needed proper medical care, birth certificates, a legal life. John knew she was right, but the fear of what might happen to the twins paralyzed him. In the days that followed, the news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. First there were whispers in the market aisles, then the curious glances of neighbors, and finally the disguised courtesy visits. Everyone wanted to see the mysterious twins who had appeared out of nowhere in the reclusive bachelor's house. Some offered genuine help, bringing used clothes from their own children or baby formula. Others came only to fuel the gossip, their eyes eager for details they could share at the next social gathering. John navigated these interactions with the awkward grace of someone who had never needed to deal with so much attention. Thor, in turn, became even more protective, growling softly when strangers got too close to the babies. It was Mrs. Concepcion, the unofficial matriarch of the neighborhood, who brought the first major turning point. An 80-year-old woman, with a memory as sharp as a razor, she appeared on a rainy morning with a basket of homemade bread and a gaze that pierced to the soul. She sat in John's living room, watched the twins sleeping in the makeshift crib he had assembled, and said in her voice, roughened by time, that she knew those eyes. The babies, she stated with unwavering conviction, had the eyes of the Miller family, a traditional family in town who had built a fortune in real estate. More specifically, they resembled the eyes of Beatrice Miller, the youngest daughter who had disappeared from social events in recent months after a hushed-up scandal involving an extramarital affair. Mrs. Concepcion's revelation planted a seed of unease in John. If the babies were really Beatrice Miller's daughters, it would explain the abandonment. The Miller family was known for its obsession with appearances and an immaculate reputation. An out-of-wedlock pregnancy, even more so of twins, would be an intolerable scandal. But it also meant that there was a mother somewhere, possibly suffering, possibly regretful. John spent sleepless nights pondering what to do with this information. The twins, whom he had begun to call Luna and Estrella in his mind, deserved to know their history. But did they deserve to be returned to a family that had rejected them? While John wrestled with moral dilemmas, practical life continued its relentless march. The expenses for the babies consumed his savings like a fire consumes dry wood. Diapers, milk, medications, clothes that they outgrew with impressive speed. His freelance design work, which had previously allowed him a comfortable life, now barely covered basic needs. The sleepless nights affected his productivity, and some clients began seeking other professionals. It was in this moment of financial despair that Mary suggested he seek official help. The government offered assistance to families in vulnerable situations, but for that, he would need to regularize the girl's situation. The trip to the Child Protective Services was one of the most tense moments of John's life. The government building, with its gray walls and hallways echoing hurried footsteps, seemed like a bureaucratic labyrinth with no way out. The social worker assigned to his case, a young woman named Fernanda, with thick-rimmed glasses and a notebook always in hand, listened to his story with a professional expression that revealed nothing. John recounted the discovery in the park, the care he had been providing, his desire to continue caring for the twins. Fernanda meticulously noted everything, asking questions that seemed like disguised traps. Did he have financial resources, experience with children, an adequate support network? Each question was a reminder of his inadequacies. Thor, who had insisted on accompanying him, despite the rules against animals in public offices, remained lying at his feet throughout the interview. At a particularly tense moment, when Fernanda questioned whether a single man would be the best option for two girls, the dog raised his head and looked at the social worker with his amber eyes. It wasn't a threatening look, but there was something in it that made Fernanda pause in her notes. It was a brief moment, but John felt as if Thor was defending his case in a way that words could not. The home visit came a week later. John had spent days tidying the house, turning his old office into a bedroom for the babies. Mary had helped, bringing a used but well-conditioned crib, and even some previously distant neighbors contributed toys and decorations. When Fernanda arrived, accompanied by an older colleague, the house was impeccable. The twins, now healthier and with rosy cheeks, played on a colorful rug while Thor watched them like a mythological guardian. The inspection was meticulous, every corner examined, every document verified. But it was the interaction between John, the babies, and Thor that seemed to make the greatest impression. The way Luna calmed down when he held her, how Estrella smiled when Thor gently licked her little hand, how the three seemed to form an unlikely but functional unit. During the visit, the first major plot twist occurred. Fernanda casually mentioned that she had received an anonymous tip about abandoned babies who might be at John's house. The tip included details that only someone very close to the situation could know. John's blood ran cold. Someone was trying to take the twins away from him. But who? And why? Fernanda, noticing his reaction, hastened to say that the tip did not change her professional assessment, but that the process would now be more complex. There would be an investigation to find the biological parents, newspaper ads, the entire legal procedure for abandonment cases. That night, John barely slept. Sitting on the porch with Thor by his side, he watched the stars and thought about how his life had changed in such a short time. The twins had brought purpose to his empty days, but they had also brought fear and uncertainty. The distant bark of an unknown dog made Thor prick up his ears, and John remembered that first bark in the park, the call that had started this whole journey. Had Thor simply sniffed out the babies, or was there something more mystical about his discovery? The dog, as if reading his thoughts, rested his head on his lap, a gesture of comfort that spoke louder than 1,000 words. The second major plot twist came on a sunny morning in April, as autumn was giving way to the first chills of winter. John was preparing the morning bottles when the doorbell rang. Outside, a woman he immediately recognized from the social media pages of local newspapers. Beatrice Miller was unrecognizable. The hair that was once perfectly styled fell disheveled over a face marked by deep, dark circles. Her designer clothes were crumpled, and her hands trembled visibly. She didn't say anything at first, just stood there, her eyes fixed on a point beyond John, as if gathering the courage to speak. When the words finally came, they were like a dam breaking. Beatrice recounted her story amidst tears and broken sobs. the unwanted pregnancy, the result of a relationship her family would never approve of. The father of the children, a penniless musician who had fled upon learning of the pregnancy, the family pressure to solve the problem discreetly, the secret delivery at a distant clinic, the postpartum depression that consumed her like a black hole, and finally, the moment of despair when she left her daughters in the park, believing that someone would find them and give them a better life than she could provide. She had watched from afar when John found them. It had been her who made the anonymous tip, not out of malice, but because she needed to officially know they were all right. Beatrice's confession left John at a complex moral crossroads. There was the biological mother, clearly repentant, but also clearly incapable of caring. For her daughters, her family had disinherited her when they found out about the babies, cutting off her access to financial resources. She now lived in a small apartment, surviving on what little she had saved before the scandal. Thor, who had remained between John and Beatrice throughout the conversation, relaxed his vigilant posture when she fell to her knees, crying uncontrollably. The dog approached her cautiously, sniffing her hands before gently licking her tear-streaked face. It was as if the animal recognized in her not a threat, but another wounded soul in need of compassion. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions and difficult decisions. Beatrice began visiting her daughters regularly, always under Thor's watchful eye. The twins, now almost 3 months old, showed no special recognition of her, treating her as just one of the many people who had entered their lives. John observed these interactions with a mixture of hope and fear. Part of him wanted Beatrice to assume her role as a mother, freeing him from a responsibility he had never asked for. Another part, larger and deeper, could no longer imagine life without Luna and Estrella. They had become a part of him, just as Thor had become years before. It was Mary who suggested the solution. In an afternoon conversation, while the twins napped and Thor rested in the sun, she proposed that John and Beatrice consider an unofficial shared custody. Beatrice could be part of her daughters' lives, contribute as she could, but John would retain primary custody. It was an unconventional arrangement, but the whole situation had been escaping conventional patterns from the beginning. The suggestion planted a seed that would grow in the following weeks, nurtured by careful conversations and delicate negotiations. During this period of emotional negotiations, another element entered John's life unexpectedly. Helen, the veterinarian who cared for Thor, began appearing more frequently. At first, these were professional visits to check on the dog's health, who was more tired with the intense routine of caring for the babies. But soon the visits extended, including conversations about the twins, advice on infant feeding that she had learned from her pediatrician sister, and eventually shared dinners while the children played. Helen had a calm demeanor that complemented John's anxious nature, and her experience with animals had taught her the patience needed to deal with creatures who couldn't express their needs in words. The first significant moment between them happened on a rainy afternoon in May. Luna had a fever and John was panicking. Helen, who happened to be visiting, took control of the situation with the same calmness she would treat an injured animal. She showed John how to check the temperature correctly, how to keep the baby comfortable, when to worry and when to relax. As they cared for Luna together, Estrella sleeping peacefully next to Thor, something changed between them. It was as if the shared care had created an invisible bridge, connecting two souls who had learned to love through caring for other beings. The second moment came weeks later, during a trip to the park, the same one where it all had begun. John now took the twins in a double stroller, Thor trotting proudly beside them, and Helen accompanying them. As they watched the children try to reach the low-hanging leaves of the trees, Helen shared her own story of loss. Her fiancé had died in an accident 3 years earlier, leaving her with a pain she channeled into caring for animals. She understood the emptiness John carried, how the twins and Thor had filled spaces he didn't even know existed. At that moment, in the filtered light of the leaves, John took her hand, a simple gesture that carried the weight of mutual understanding. As their delicate romance blossomed, the twins' legal situation reached a critical point. The final hearing was scheduled for June, when the girls would turn 6 months old. Fernanda had become an unexpected ally, impressed by John's dedication and the visible improvement in the baby's health and development. Her report was favorable, but the final decision would rest with the judge. Beatrice, in turn, had formally agreed to relinquish full custody, requesting only regular visitation rights. She had found a modest job and was rebuilding her life, but she recognized that she did not have the emotional or financial capacity to assume full motherhood. The night before the hearing was one of the longest in John's life. He paced the house, checking on the twins every few minutes, as if afraid they might disappear during sleep. Thor followed him faithfully, his soft steps on the wooden floor creating a comforting melody. Helen had offered to spend the night, preparing chamomile tea and listening to John's fears without judgment. In a moment of deep vulnerability, he confessed that he no longer knew who he was without the girls. They had become his light, his hope, his reason for waking up every morning. Helen hugged him. Then, and in that hug was an unspoken promise that he would not face the future alone. The morning of the hearing dawned clear and cold. John wore his best suit, the same one he had worn at his parents' funeral, now with a completely different meaning. The twins were dressed in clothes donated by Mary, small floral dresses that made them look like porcelain dolls. Thor, brushed to a shine, wore a new collar that Helen had bought especially for the occasion. The courthouse was located in the city center, an imposing building that seemed to judge everyone who passed through its doors. Beatrice was already there, accompanied by a lawyer she had obtained through free legal aid. She shyly waved to John, her eyes reflecting a mixture of gratitude and sadness. The hearing itself was surprisingly brief. The judge, a middle-aged man with tired but kind eyes, listened to the reports, examined the evidence of the care provided by John, and asked few questions. When he asked John why he wanted custody of the twins, the answer came from the heart, without rehearsal or preparation. He spoke about the emptiness he carried before them, about how Thor had found them when he himself was lost, about how caring for them had taught him that family wasn't about blood, but about the daily choice to love and protect. He spoke about faith in humanity's ability to transform tragedy into hope, about the light that Luna and Estrella had brought to his dark house. The most dramatic moment came when the judge asked to see the children. John brought them in his arms, Thor walking solemnly beside him. Luna, always the more extroverted one, smiled at the judge and extended her little arms. Estrella, more reserved, nestled against John's chest, but her curious eyes observed everything around her. It was then that Thor did something extraordinary. The dog walked up to the judge, sat in front of him, and extended his paw, a trick that John had taught him years before, but that Thor rarely performed. The gesture broke the formality of the moment, eliciting a genuine smile from the magistrate. It was as if the dog was sealing a deal, promising to continue protecting those he had saved. The decision came 2 weeks later, delivered by a bailiff on an ordinary Tuesday morning. John was feeding the twins when the doorbell rang, and his hands trembled so much as he picked up the envelope that Helen had to open it for him. Custody had been granted. The words danced on the paper as tears clouded his vision. Luna and Estrella were officially his daughters. The document also recognized Beatrice's visitation rights, establishing a schedule that would allow her to gradually rebuild the bond with her daughters. It was a complete victory, but John felt the weight of responsibility, even stronger now that it was official. The celebration was modest but meaningful. The neighbors organized a street barbecue, transforming what could have been just another Sunday into a family party. Mrs. Concepcion brought her famous cornbread. Mary coordinated the activities with military efficiency, and even neighbors John barely knew showed up to congratulate them. The twins, now sitting unsupported and babbling their first attempts at words, were the center of attention. Thor circulated among the guests like a proud host, accepting snacks and pets with royal dignity. Helen remained by John's side throughout the party, her presence discreet but constant, reminding everyone that his family had grown in more than one way. It was during this celebration that the third crucial moment between John and Helen happened. As the sun set and the guests began to disperse, she found him alone on the back porch, watching the twins sleeping in the stroller under Thor's watchful supervision. Without words, she sat beside him, and together they watched the first stars appear in the sky. When she finally spoke, it was to say that she loved him, not with the impetuous passion of youth, but with the calm certainty of someone who recognizes a home in another person. John kissed her then, a kiss that carried promises of shared mornings and challenges faced together. The following months brought a routine that, while tiring, was full of small joys. The twins grew rapidly, each developmental milestone celebrated as a personal victory. Luna's first steps happened on an August morning, wobbly but determined, toward Thor, who waited patiently for her. Estrella, always more cautious, took another 2 weeks to venture out, but when she did, it was with a grace that foreshadowed the ballerina she would become years later. Beatrice visited regularly, her presence gradually becoming more natural and less laden with guilt. She had found strength in therapy and work, rebuilding herself day by day. The fourth significant moment between John and Helen came on a stormy night in September. The twins were sick with a common but frightening virus, crying inconsolably. Helen had practically moved in to help, and, together they spent the night in vigil, taking turns caring for them. It was during one of those moments, at 3 in the morning, with Luna finally asleep in his arms while John lulled Estrella, that Helen pulled a small object from her pocket. It was a key, simple and unadorned, but its meaning was profound. The key to her house, offered not as a grand gesture, but as a natural recognition that their lives were already intertwined beyond the point of return. The real trial by fire came in October, when John received a job offer that could change everything. An international design firm had seen his portfolio and offered a position in Sao Paulo, Brazil, with a salary that would solve all financial concerns. It was the opportunity he would have grabbed without hesitation 2 years earlier, but now the decision was agonizing. It would mean uprooting the twins from the only home they knew, moving away from Mary and the support network they had built, possibly complicating Beatrice's visits. Helen listened to him ponder for days, never pressuring, but always present. It was Thor who, in a way, gave the answer. On a walk through the park where it all had begun, the dog guided them to the same fig tree. There, where the twins' lives had begun their new chapter, John understood that some roots were too deep to be uprooted. The decision to refuse the offer brought not regret, but relief. John intensified his freelance work, getting better clients, now that he had a clear motivation. Helen formalized her move, transforming the house into an even fuller home. The twins called her Lena, a childish version of her name that became a term of endearment used by everyone. The unconventional family functioned with a harmony that surprised even the most skeptical. Beatrice found her place as a special aunt, present but without the pressure of full motherhood that had broken her before. The fifth and most significant moment between John and Helen happened on the twins' first birthday. The party was large, a reflection of how many lives the little ones had touched. The park was decorated with balloons and banners, tables laden with homemade sweets and savory dishes prepared by the community. The girls, dressed in dresses made by Mrs. Conception, were the epitome of childish joy. During the party, while everyone sang happy birthday, Helen whispered something in John's ear that made him stop mid-song. She was pregnant. The news, shared in that moment of celebration, was the final proof that life had completed a perfect circle. What had begun with a desperate abandonment had transformed into an abundance of love. Thor, now showing the first signs of age, observed everything with the wisdom of someone who had silently orchestrated that miracle. His steps were slower, his naps longer, but his commitment to the twins remained unwavering. It was as if he knew that his work was almost complete, that he had built a fortress of love around those he had saved. John often found him sleeping next to the girl's crib, a guardian who never abandoned his post even in sleep. Helen's pregnancy brought new challenges and joys. The twins, now walking confidently and developing distinct personalities, reacted to the news with the typical curiosity of children. Luna, always the more talkative one, asked endless questions about the baby. Estrella, more observant, gently, touched Helen's growing belly with a reverence that moved everyone who witnessed it. Beatrice, surprisingly, became a fundamental support during this period. She had found redemption in helping Helen, as if caring for the woman who cared for her daughters was a way to repay an unpayable debt. The birth of Peter Henry on a cold June morning was met with joy, but also with a silent concern. Thor, now, having difficulty climbing stairs, had not yet met the new member of the family. John brought the baby home wrapped in blankets, his heart heavy with the premonition that time with his faithful companion was running out. But Thor, gathering strength from some deep reserve, got up when he heard the baby's cry. With shaky but determined steps, he approached and gently sniffed the new human pup. Satisfied that yet another life was under his protection, he lay down, at the foot of the crib, assuming his role as guardian one last time. Thor passed away on a July afternoon surrounded by his family. The twins, now almost 2 years old, didn't fully understand, but they knew their furry protector was going to a special place. John held Peter Henry while silent tears streamed down his face. Helen hugged the girls, explaining in simple words that Thor would always be watching over them, just from a different place. Beatrice, who had arrived for her weekly visit, joined the circle of mourning, finally understanding the depth of what that dog had represented. He had not only saved his daughters, he had saved them all in different ways. Thor's funeral was held in the garden of the house, under the shade of the black mulberry tree where he loved to rest. Each member of the extended family, including Mary Garcia, Mrs. Concepcion, and other neighbors who had become family, shared a memory. The twins placed their favorite toys next to the body of their friend, innocent gestures that carried the weight of pure love. John spoke about how Thor had seen the invisible, how he had recognized the need before it even revealed itself. Helen planted an oak sapling over the spot, promising that every spring, when the leaves appeared, they would remember the dog who had planted the seeds of their family. Life went on, as it always does, but now it bore the indelible mark of Thor. The twins grew up surrounded by love, each milestone celebrated by a family that extended far beyond blood ties. Peter Henry, the baby Thor had blessed in his last days, showed early signs of a special connection with animals, as if he had inherited something of the dog's spirit. Beatrice, now stable and rebuilt, had found a new relationship and shared custody more actively, providing the twins with an even larger network of love and support. On a March afternoon, exactly 3 years after the rescue, John took the twins to the park. They ran among the trees, their laughter echoing like crystal bells. As they passed the old fig tree, Luna stopped and pointed. There, almost hidden among the roots, was a puppy, abandoned like its mothers had been. Without hesitation, the girls ran to it, their little hearts already knowing the imperative of compassion. John watched, his chest tight with the poetic symmetry of the moment, as his daughters repeated the gesture that had changed all their lives. The pup, a stray with amber eyes that eerily resembled Thor's, was immediately adopted and named Guardian. Guardian Singh. Integration into the family was surprisingly smooth, as if he had always belonged there. The twins took on the responsibility of caring for him with a maturity that was surprising for their age. Peter Henry, now crawling, showed a natural affinity for the pup, and the two were often found sleeping together in impossible positions. Helen observed everything with the contentment of someone who had found her place in the world, her improbable but perfect family being living proof that love doesn't follow predetermined rules. Beatrice, in a development that surprised everyone, announced her engagement on the twins' 4th birthday. Her partner, a kind man who had accepted her complex story without judgment, only asked to be a part of the girls' extended life. The ceremony was held in the same park where it all had begun, with Luna and Estrella as bridesmaids and guardian, proudly carrying the rings. John, in symbolically giving his daughters to also be daughters of another, felt not loss, but a multiplication of love. The already unconventional family embraced yet another expansion of its elastic limits. Years passed in a whirlwind of first days of school, Estrella's ballet recitals, Luna's soccer games, and Peter Henry's growing mischief. Guardian grew strong and loyal, assuming the mantle of protector that Thor had left behind. John and Helen, now officially married in a simple but deeply emotional ceremony, built a life neither of them had ever imagined possible. The house, once silent and full of melancholic memories, vibrated with life and laughter. The walls displayed children's drawings, photographs of precious moments, and in the place of honor, a portrait of Thor, the dog who had seen what no one else had seen. On a stormy night, similar to the one when Helen had offered her key, John found himself awake again. But this time, it wasn't out of worry or fear. It was out of the deep gratitude that sometimes overwhelmed him. He walked through the house, checking on each child sleeping peacefully, Guardian raising his head briefly before returning to sleep. In the master bedroom, Helen slept with her hand on her belly, where her second biological child was growing. The family continued to expand, defying conventional definitions, proving that love knows no bounds when the heart is open. The oak tree in the garden bloomed for the 5th time, its leaves as golden as Thor's fur in the sun. The children, now older, understood better the story of how their family had formed. They knew every detail of the rescue, of the insistent bark that had changed everything, of their father's courage in embracing the unknown. The story had become a family legend, told and retold on pizza and movie nights, each telling adding new details and perspectives. Luna, now 7 years old and the family's official storyteller, always ended the same way her father had taught her, with the reminder that life's greatest treasures often come disguised as interruptions in our comfortable routines. On an ordinary Sunday, as they prepared the family lunch that now included Beatrice, her husband, and their new baby, as well as Mary Garcia, Mrs. Concepcion, and other members of the chosen family, John stopped to observe the controlled chaos around him. Children running, Guardian barking joyfully, Helen coordinating the kitchen with loving efficiency, overlapping conversations creating a symphony of belonging. His eyes met Helen's across the crowd, and in that look was the whole story they had written together, a story that began with a bark and transformed into a symphony of love. The lesson Thor had taught remained alive in every act of kindness, in every outstretched hand, in every heart open to the unexpected. The twins, now old enough to understand the sacrifice and love behind their story, carried that lesson like a torch. They volunteered at the local animal shelter, helped with adoption campaigns, and always kept their eyes open for those who needed to be seen. Estrella, with her natural grace, taught dance to underprivileged children. Luna, with her combative spirit, organized fundraisers for families in need. Peter Henry, the youngest of the 3 oldest, showed signs of wanting to be a veterinarian, his connection with animals being almost supernatural. The house that once housed only a lonely man and his dog now overflowed with life in every corner. The walls told stories in every height mark, in every frame drawing, in every photograph capturing precious moments. The garden, where Thor rested under the blooming oak tree, had become a sanctuary of peace, where the family gathered to share challenges and celebrate victories. Guardian, now an adult, kept watch over the children with the same dedication as his spiritual predecessor, as if Thor's spirit guided him in his mission. John often wondered what would have happened if he had ignored Thor's barks that fateful day. The life he would lead would be simpler, certainly, but it would be empty of the richness that now defined his existence. Every challenge faced, every sleepless night, every financial worry had been repaid 1,000-fold in love and purpose. He had learned that family is not about perfection or conventionality, but about choosing to love even when it is difficult, about seeing beyond appearances, about recognizing that sometimes the greatest gifts come wrapped in crisis paper. And so on that Sunday afternoon, as the sun set painting the sky with the same colors as that day in the park years ago, John raised his glass in a silent toast. To Thor, who had seen the invisible. To the twins who had transformed tragedy into triumph. To Helen, who had chosen to build something extraordinary with him. To Beatrice, who had found redemption and strength, to every person who had become family, and to the future, which would surely bring new challenges but also new opportunities to choose love over fear. The children, sensing their father's moment of reflection, approached. Luna, always the spokesperson, asked what he was thinking. John smiled, pulling them close as Guardian settled at his feet. He told once again the story of a special dog who had seen what no one else saw, of babies who needed a home, of how love had transformed strangers into family. The children, even knowing every word, listened with the same attention as always, because some stories deserve to be told eternally, passed down from generation to generation as a legacy of hope. When the story ended and the children ran off to play, Helen approached, the new baby in her arms. She sat next to John, resting her head on his shoulder. Together, they watched their improbable but perfect family, built on the foundations that a courageous dog had established. In the shared silence, there was an unasked question that hung in the air like the scent of oak blossoms. In how many parks at this very moment are there other Thors waiting to show the way? How many lives are waiting to be transformed by a simple act of seeing beyond the visible? And you, who followed this journey from beginning to end, who witnessed how a bark can change destinies, and how love can bloom in the most unexpected places. At what moment will you allow hope to bloom in your own desert? When will you open your eyes to see what others ignore? Extend your hand to those in need, and discover that family is so much more than blood and convention. Thor's story teaches us that miracles don't fall from the sky in flashes of light, but arrive on four paws, in baby cries, in outstretched hands and open hearts. May we all have the courage to answer the call when our own Thor barks, insistent and full of purpose, guiding us to the love that has always been waiting to be discovered.